So hello and welcome back. This time we're at lecture number 12 in our series, in our course Project Stakeholder Management. And what I'm going to do in this lecture is I'm going to carry on where I left in the preceding lecture, where I started talking about the 9 principal drivers of interest in connection with project stakeholder management and engagement. And you will recall that in the last lecture I had talked about stakeholder theory as a driver, and I had talked about awareness as a driver of interest in project stakeholder management and engagement. And what I'm going to do now in this lecture is I'm going to continue with some of the other drivers. Each of them, as I pointed out, is really a subject in itself, because there's so much one could say about these different drivers. Let me now talk about the complexification of the project environment as a third driver. Complexification, the project environment. Project environments are becoming more and more complex with the passage of time. There are many reasons for this. Now in this age of globalization, in this age of mega projects, where we are seeing there is a race to build everything bigger, everything taller, everything better. There is now a lot of sort of investments taking place across borders. Joint ventures are taking place. The legal frameworks have been sort of modified in order to facilitate all this. So projects are becoming more and more complex, more, you could say, also transnational in their scope. And of course, there are also a lot of issues associated with all that. If you look at the term complexity, the dimensions of complexity, there are different dimensions with regards here to projects and the environment in which projects are being undertaken. If you look at complexity at the project level, you say projects are becoming more capital or more cost intensive. There is more expertise, there is more specialized knowledge which is being required for projects. There is more, you could say, interaction between stakeholders, more communication. There are more complex teams, becoming very diverse teams, people of different ages, genders, skills, location, all having to work together now on projects. So at the project level itself, there is this greater element of complexity, inherent element of complexity. If you look at the associational complexity, as I pointed out, joint ventures, a lot of them are taking place, especially in the last 20-25 years, where it has become fashionable almost to do joint ventures, to get together with partners from other countries, even within a country, and to work together to do projects. Is also because of the funding requirement. Projects can be very cost intensive, and no one entity can provide all this. One has to get different entities to provide funding, also to share risks, for instance. And transformational complexity, environmental complexity, okay, I don't really want to go into too much detail at the moment now, but the fact is that the project environments are getting more complex. NGOs are there, they're constantly looking at projects, for instance. There are still legal issues which are there, sometimes collaborating with people from different cultures. That brings its own set of challenges, communicational challenges, the way work is performed, the way tasks are perceived, and so forth, and so forth. Let us look first at environmental complexity briefly. Projects today take place in an external environment of far greater complexity than they did in the past, say 50 years ago, or 60 years ago, or even 45 years ago. For example, if you take new product development or new service development projects, These now include heavy competition for products and services against the backdrop of globalization, product lifecycle compression, rapidly changing consumer preferences and demand for customized products and services. Okay, maybe about 50 years ago, you would go to the market and then there would be certain products and you could either take them or you could leave them. But this was all that there was. There were maybe a relatively small set of products, and you could then decide, which one you want, and I mean, that was it. There was nothing else apart from that. But now, this age of globalization, the past 20 years or so, we know that there's a lot of competition now internationally. Countries like China, for instance, have come up. Over time, countries like South Korea have come up. Taiwan has come up. In the textile sector, if you look at it, there's a lot of competition now in the textile sector, which maybe there wasn't 20 years ago. And so forth, and the same applies to services. So this the age of globalization, this opening of borders, this phenomenal growth in world trade, imports and exports, which has occurred in the last 20-25 years, all this implies a heavy element of competition. So, where previously there might have been just 2 or 3 companies making washing machines, for instance, or some other appliances, now you might have 20 or 30 which are in the business. So there's this competition element, the product life cycle compression. Nowadays, you have a product and you use it for 1 or 2 years, maybe a bit longer, and then what you do is you might sell it off, or you dispose it off, or gift it, and then you would go for a new product which comes out, because products now are constantly being updated to reflect technological changes, to reflect market changes, to reflect stylistic changes, and so forth, which was not the case decades ago. There you would buy a product and you would have it for 20 or 30 years. You buy an air conditioner maybe in the 1960s and the 1970s, and it was intended to be used possibly for the rest of the life. So now this is not the case. You buy a laptop, and after 2 years it's already technically obsolete. So this kind of compression of the product life cycle has been taking place, in which you keep products or you use products for a much shorter time than you did in the past. Obviously this has implications for projects because you have to come up then with a new product. It might be a complete redesign of the product, or it might be a extension or improvement upon the product. Whatever it is, it's a project. It requires a project, and one has to be very mindful also of the element of competition and so forth when one is doing these projects. Rapidly changing consumer preferences and demand for customized products and services. We're all living in a very individualistic society where we are all encouraged, to express ourselves, in some places more than others, and also our tastes and our preferences. We all have individual tastes and preferences. In older times, we did not have many avenues to express our preferences and our tastes in terms of products and services. We had to take what was there. But now there has been a more focus on providing customized products and services. Customized is what you really want. If you take, for example, Dell as a company which manufactures computers, you can customize your computer. If you order a computer from them, a desktop, laptop, whatever, you can give your own requirements, your own specifications, and they will put the components together to reflect your requirements and specifications. So instead of you just going into a shop and saying, okay, yeah, there are 5 computers or 5 laptops, 2, 3, 4, 5, this one most closely resembles my preferences, I'll take it. Well, that is still in vogue, but with this customized production, what you can do is you can really sort of tell the manufacturer what you want, and you can get accordingly. So all this has, you could say, really made the project's environments more complex than they were in the past. This competitive element, this time element, this stylistic, taste-related element. When we talk about environment, we also have to talk about the, of course, natural environment, the ecology. And as you know, that NGOs, especially environmental NGOs, they have become very powerful, goes without saying. And the emergence of the powerful NGO sector, public concern over and politicization of a host of issues, for example, natural environment, human rights, critical media spotlight, and information communication technology, have added to the pressures experienced by projects, resulting frequently in a diversion of project resources, time, and energy into defensive measures, the firefighting, which I talked about in the previous class. Anyway, the environment has become a big topic. It's a very hot topic now, the natural environment. If you look at the discussion about global climate change, that is relating to the natural environment, and we know that climate change has got very severe implications for practically the entire planet. It's practically for all of us, about 7 billion people who are living on the planet. And how has this come about, this climate change? Well, to a large extent, it's also the result of projects. It's the result of, for example, construction of certain power stations, which are using certain types of input to generate electricity, and the pollution emissions which they caused. It's a result of commercial jetliners. And of course these started off as projects, and then they went into mass production. And there are many other factors which are causing climate change, but at the beginning of it all, these start off with projects, which then go into operation, and which then cause environmental degradation, which results in climate change. So now environment has become such a hot topic, and you have all these NGOs which are always, looking, okay, this project is being done, what are its environmental implications, and that project is being done, what are its environmental implications. You have these development financing institutions like World Bank, Asian Development Bank. When you apply for funding for them for these types of projects, there's also a social impact assessment, there is an environmental impact assessment, which are mandatory, which have to be looked into. How is this project going to affect the environment? And if it is considered that the environmental repercussions, the negative environmental repercussions are too large, then it's quite possible that the funding will be denied for that particular project. Even the government of Pakistan now has started requiring environmental impact assessments for larger projects. So it's this environmental complexity, which also includes the natural environment, which is making it more difficult for projects. And of course, this also means then that these are drivers of stakeholder management and stakeholder engagement, drivers of interest in stakeholder management and engagement, because one has to deal then with these stakeholders who are very critical with regard to the project. When we come to transformational complexity, there's also a little bit which I would just like to point out here. For years, all organizations, private, public, not-for-profit, have been exposed to internal transformational changes or forces on an unprecedented level. For example, pressure to reduce costs, pressure to use resources optimally or efficiently, to introduce IT infrastructure, to diversify, to restructure, to re-engineer processes, and TQM. So all these organizations, they also have been sort of pushed into adopting all these things which I have given over here. And that, of course, also makes the environment a little bit more complicated. Organizations have to transform, and they have to manage their projects and their programs within this transformational framework. So this is another thing one has to keep in mind: cost reduction. You have to do your project and at the same time you have to try and keep costs at the minimum possible level. You have to use resources efficiently. You have to concentrate on quality aspects. You have to look at process re-engineering. All this comes under transformational complexity. The associational complexity, as I already have pointed out, there has been a lot of growth in projects such as joint ventures, strategic alliances. Something which is very much in vogue nowadays is public-private partnerships. You might have also read a lot about them in the paper. A lot of projects which are being undertaken in Pakistan now also are being undertaken in the public-private partnership mode. That in itself is a big subject, and there are all different kinds of modes in which you can do these partnerships. Often they're done the public sector and the private sector. The public sector does not want to fund such projects because they are very cost intensive. So what it does is it just provides a sort of the framework, or it provides land or facilities, and then it's left to a private sector entity to actually do the project and to operate the outcomes of that project, for which they would take in a certain fee or cost. Mergers and acquisitions, this is now $1 trillion or €1 trillion business. Thousands of mergers and acquisitions of companies, for instance, have taken place over the last 20-25 years. Mergers and acquisitions are a project themselves. When two organizations merge, that's a project. When one organization acquires another organization, that is also a project. So, and there are a lot of issues relating to mergers and acquisitions. In many cases, the intended benefits of mergers and acquisitions have not come about. And there are many reasons for that. If you look, for example, at Daimler Chrysler, a German company and an American company, and Daimler had de facto acquired Chrysler, thought that it would bring a lot of market benefits, access to new markets, a lot of new profit, and so forth. But it didn't quite work out as planned, because maybe the cultures of the two organizations, the way of doing things, the way of doing business, the administrative setup, etc., was very different, and they could not somehow work it out. Outsourcing of projects, like in the IT sector, outsourcing from Western countries to countries like India, to countries like Pakistan, to other countries in Asia, to countries in Latin America. All these is, it has an associative element involved with it, which is quite complex. And you know that there were quite a few issues with regards to outsourcing project work outside of national borders or across continental borders. It brings benefits, but it brings a whole new set of challenges with it also. So this associational complexity, all this has also driven interest in project stakeholder management and engagement, for the very simple reason in this case is because you have got more stakeholders. When you enter into partnerships, when you enter into alliances and all that, you have more stakeholders, and you have potentially very different or sometimes very difficult stakeholders, and you have to manage them. You have to come up with a system, a strategy to manage them. The complexity at the project level, as I already pointed out in the beginning, today's projects tend to be inherently more complex than their predecessors, especially when you're talking about larger projects in construction, in IT. Increasing number of projects, especially in construction, civil engineering, require astronomical sums of capital. The Three Gorges Dam, which I had pointed out in one of the previous lectures, the estimated cost was around $25 billion. Now that is a huge sum of money. That is a sum which is equivalent, or which is larger than the gross domestic product of many countries in the world, 25 billion. Nowadays, multi-billion sums are normal for larger projects. So these very large sums of capital are required. Projects take longer time to complete. Some projects can take well over 10 years to complete. They utilize inputs, technologies, processes, and expertise supplied by numerous stakeholders from across the globe. It's not that you now take everything from within your locality or from within your country even, but now, because projects have become so complex, because the knowledge, the insights, the technology, the experience which is required to do the projects have become so complex that one has to go and look around to find them. And that means that one has to think globally, not to think locally or to think nationally, but one has to expand the horizon to think globally, and one has to take these inputs and these expertise and this knowledge and supplies from all over the world. From a stakeholder perspective, that means that there are a lot of complications, because previously, where you could have taken your inputs locally or nationally, now you have to go across borders. You have to import items, for instance. You have to deal with people in other continents. You have to deal with stakeholders who speak other languages. We speak English over here. The stakeholders who we might be dealing with on our projects might speak very little English, for instance, and they might have different standards, they might have different specifications, different units of measurement, and different technologies, different processes. And one has to be cognizant of all these things, and one has to take them into account. One can do that, but of course it means that the complexity level also rises. Dealing with the stakeholders, the difficulty level also rises. So in other words, one has to try and understand one's stakeholders more. One has to understand them culturally. People from Asia, people from the Middle East, people from Africa, people from Europe, people from North America, people from South America, people from Australia. They have different ways of doing things. They have different expressions. They have different, the way they look at things, the way they perceive work, the way they perceive business, the way they perceive time. All things which I had pointed out in one of my previous lectures. So all these factors, this complexity and environmental complexity and associational complexity and transformational complexity, all these lead into one thing, and that is one has to be very careful in how one is managing and engaging one's stakeholders. The more complexity, the more careful one has to be. And because things are getting more complex, because stakeholders are assuming such a high degree of importance in projects, that means that they are a driving factor. This complexity is a driving factor with regards to generating interest in project stakeholder management and engagement. Let us now look at another driver, which is cooperation, society, and the environment. We come again to the environment also. Well, commercial organizations, as we know, all organizations, not only commercial organizations, but commercial organizations do not operate in a vacuum, but they are embedded in a social and natural environment for which they bear some responsibility. The preceding class lecture, I talked about stakeholder theory, and I also pointed out that there were different schools of thought. One, the neoclassical school of thought, says that, well, we have the corporation or the organization, and one should focus on that, and they should not focus on the environment, and they should not focus so much on social matters. The corporation is there to generate certain products or certain services, and they should concentrate on that, and they should forget about everything else. Then you have different school of thought which say, no, corporation or an organization is working within a social environment, it's working within a natural environment. They are taking resources from society, they are using the environment, the natural environment, so they have some responsibility to give something back. Now, this is a school of thought which I also adhere to, that when you take, then you also should give back. And corporations also have come around to this. They also realize that they cannot just focus only on the business which they are doing, but they also have to be involved somehow in social work and in protecting the natural environment. And that is why corporations worldwide, in all countries, even in Pakistan, they now spend billions and billions every year on CSR programs. CSR is corporate social responsibility. And it's a huge, huge business in itself now. And it can take on many different manifestations. There are many different ways in which a corporation can perform its social responsibility. It all comes down to the 3 P's, which are over here. If you look at it, the 3 P's at the lower left of your screen: profit, planet, people. Profit is the commercial aspect, planet is the natural environmental aspect, and people is the social aspect. This is also referred to as the triple bottom line, which corporations are supposed to look into. And many corporations are also engaged in dialogues on sustainability and other themes with civil society. Later on, in one of the subsequent lectures, when we talk about stakeholder management and engagement, specifically with regards to engagement strategies, we'll also be looking a little bit at this. I don't want to go into CSR because actually it's a whole course in itself. If you visit the websites of the major corporations, not even the major ones, even of the smaller corporations, if you look at them, or if you look at their annual reports, you will usually find either a section or a whole chapter on their CSR activities. And the CSR activities can be diverse. I mean, you can find one corporation that is focusing more on promoting primary education or secondary education. You can find another corporation that is maybe helping finance sanitation schemes or programs. Or you can find another corporation which is, funding scholarships or stipends. It's basically a whole spectrum of activities. And one doesn't have to focus only on one activity. One can focus on multiple activities at any point in time, and most organizations do that. It's nice to know that also many Pakistani organizations, also commercial organizations, are also having quite extensive CSR programs. Now we come to another driver of interest in project stakeholder management and engagement. And that is the role of the DFIs and the DIAs. DFIs, I had pointed out earlier, development financing institutions. These are institutions like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Latin American Development Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, and so forth, which are providing funds for development programs and projects. Can be social programs, projects, can be more civil engineering type programs, projects. They all have one thing in common, is that they are contributing to development. So you have these development financing agencies. You have also development implementing agencies or institutions. These are, as I also pointed out earlier, organizations like USAID, CEDA, GIZ, DFID, French aid, and the Australians, and the New Zealanders, and the Swiss, and the Norwegians, and the Swedes. Some of the smaller developed countries, they also have got their own institutions, agencies, which are facilitating, sponsoring development projects and programs all over the world. Anyway, every year, collectively, vast sums of money are channeled into developmental programs and projects by a multitude of institutions. And a sophisticated level of stakeholder management and engagement by funding recipients, those who receive the funds from these agencies and institutions, has now become an essential precondition for disbursement of development funds by these institutions and agencies. So now, if you look at some of the conditions which you as a recipient have to fulfill in order to get these funds, in order to get the support, expertise and experience and so forth, in order to pursue these developmental programs and projects, well, you now have also got to perform stakeholder management and engagement. It's becoming more and more important. It's a requirement also. You can't just get funds and say, okay, I'm doing this project and that's it. The agencies, the institutions which are giving funds officially, they would like to know how you are going to utilize those funds, what you are going to do with those funds, and what benefits they are going to bring to the target groups, to the intended beneficiaries of those funds. You have to justify that. You have to explain it. You have to provide some concrete data, how is this going to benefit people. So this is, of course, this means that one has to have more insight into the stakeholders, who are the intended beneficiaries, and how they are going to benefit from a project or program, how they are going to benefit, how village XY, for instance, is going to benefit from a sanitation program, or how the farmers in this area are going to benefit from the laying of a new water pipeline, for instance. So there has to be some more insights into stakeholder management and engagement here. Yes, this is the assessment which I had also pointed out now. Two tools used by development program and project funding and implementing institutions and agencies, which are very relevant from a stakeholder perspective, are the environmental impact assessment and the social impact assessment. I had also mentioned it in one of the previous classes. And over here, on the bottom left side of your screen, you can see an illustration of the environmental impact assessment process. You can see it here step by step, starting at the top, from the initial information to screening, to scoping, doing an environmental impact assessment study and preparation of an environmental impact assessment report. Some of them I have seen are thick documents relating to projects and programs. And then finally, right at the end here, decision making. All the while looking at different things like impact significance, impact prediction, description, and mitigation measures. So it's a whole step-by-step process which is given here, which is mandatory. And this is very relevant from a stakeholder process. The social impact assessment is all about stakeholders, how they are going to be impacted as a result of the project and program. Or the environmental impact assessment, how is the natural environment as a stakeholder going to be impacted by the project or the program. And there are also other assessment forms which are perhaps not so often discussed, but they are there. Archaeological heritage impact assessment. How is the project or program going to impact on the archaeological heritage of an area or a site? Or economic impact assessment on the business and the industry and the economy and the agriculture and so forth. Of course, which are all stakeholders are there. So this again shows you that interest in stakeholder management and engagement has also improved because of the development, financing, and implementing institutions, the pressure which is coming from them. That's another driving factor which is driving interest in project stakeholder management and engagement. I have given here on this slide quite a number of these development financing institutions, starting here at the top, the World Bank. And if you click on this, this will take you directly to the World Bank site. And all these institutions over here, if you visit their websites, you will find publications, you will find documentation. And if you look through them also by using the search function, you will find a lot of documents relating to stakeholder management and engagement, policy documents, for instance, and so forth. European Investment Bank over here. This one over here must be the, I don't know which one this is, I have to see. North American Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development. This is one over here. Nordic Development Fund, Asian Development Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, African Development Bank Group. Notice all of them, Caribbean Development Bank, all of them have got the term development, or most of them have the term development contained in them. Financing development projects and programs. If you just want to have a look at the World Bank website over here. Yeah, here you can see the World Bank website. And if you look, you can see that there is a section here, publications, and if you click on these publications, you have here documents and reports, over 80,000 free downloadable documents. A lot of them are related to stakeholders also. You've got a bookstore. You have got archives here from 1946, videos, everything. Libraries you have got over here. A huge amount of information is contained. If you want to look for information specifically on Pakistan, well, then you click on the countries link. And if you want to look by country, activities by country, then you can go over here. Where's here? Pakistan. You can see here Pakistan. Yeah. And there you find some information, and you'll find a lot of publications. You'll see also the projects and programs which the World Bank is undertaking over here. And you'll find some data regarding projects and programs in Pakistan. And so forth over here. All this information is given. And here, research. Let's see what we have over here under the research heading. You can find some jobs over here. Environmental studies, corporate governance. These are also quite relevant for stakeholder management. And so forth. And under the publication section, of course, you will also find a lot of data relating also to Pakistan and the projects which are being undertaken over here. In this regard also, you may like to look up the website of the Asian Development Bank, because the Asian Development Bank traditionally has been providing a lot of funding for development projects and programs in Pakistan. Now, if you look at this slide over here, these are the development implementing agencies. The other ones were the funding. These are the implementing ones. You have here USAID. You have here European Commission. You have here Australian Aid, AusAid, CEDA, the Canadian, JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, DFID, which is the British one, GTZ, which is now GIZ, the German one, Irish Aid, OECD, Norwegian Aid, Swiss, Belgium, New Zealand, Luxembourg, Denmark, Iceland, Austria, Korea, and then another one over here, France. So you have all these which are given, and it might be useful sometimes to go and have a look at them and see what kind of publications they have got, also relating to stakeholders. Let's just click on DFID here. I hope the link is still active. Yeah, seems to be. That's good. Although it is taking a little bit of a time to come up. Let's keep looking. Yeah, okay, here we are. Department for International Development. This is UK aid from the British people. And here's information about us, what we do, where we work, news, stories, quick links. What is this over here? Publications. It's always good to go into the publication area and see. And yeah, here you have got publications. You also have a search function. You can see over here all the publications which they have got. You can see here Multi-Stakeholder Forestry Program Annual Review. So you also already have some reports on stakeholders, and there's a huge number of publications which are given over here. So I think you'll get the point. You know, for all of these, you can look them up. Many of them are not English-speaking countries, but they always have a sort of a link to a English version of their website where you can find then some useful, relevant information. Also, a few more here. The Turkish International Cooperation and Development Agency. Here, international from Taiwan. And here from the small kingdom Principality of Liechtenstein, which is between Austria and Switzerland in Europe. So it's all good to have a look at these things. Okay, now moving on to another driver of interest in project stakeholder management and engagement, that is law and public participation. And as you know, the law can be used in favor of projects. It can also be used against projects, getting stay orders, for instance. Over time, laws relevant for projects have changed. And as I pointed out in one of the previous lectures, there are a lot of laws which can affect a project. It depends, of course, on the nature of the project, the category, and where it's being undertaken. But usually there are many laws which interface with a project. Environmental law, for instance, has evolved considerably. Environmental law is much different today than it was, say, 30 years ago. It reflects the concern about the environment, about perceptions about the environment. From a project perspective, these changes constitute a potentially serious challenge because any infringement thereof can be used by the enemies of a project, the project adversaries, to adversely impact the project. If you look at the law, and if it's become more stringent now than it was, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago, well, this increase in stringency can pose a risk for the project. If there are more requirements on the project, more demands on the project to proceed in a manner which does not conflict with the natural environment, that is a greater risk for the project now than it was many years ago. And this law can be used by those stakeholders who are against your project. Environmental NGO, for instance, can say, well, you know, what this project is doing is violating such and such clause, such and such paragraph of such and such environmental law. Therefore, action should be taken against it. So one has to analyze the laws, one has to examine them from a stakeholder relevant perspective. One has to see how the law can affect the project, especially negatively, from the perspective of the stakeholders who may use that law. So that is why one has to analyze the stakeholders, and one also has to see what options they have at their disposal, which includes using the law as a very powerful tool against projects. Public participation, well, you know, over the years there has been more interest, or there has been more demand for public participation in administrative decision-making processes. For instance, for issuing a permit to do a project, whereas 20, 30 years ago it might have been just a routine thing. Yes, you apply for the permit is given. Now, many places, they will not issue a permit like that. They will then ask first the stakeholders to come and say, what do they have to say about this project? Do they have any objections to this project? Should it be done? Should it not be done? Things which they do now, which they did not do many years ago. Of course, that also poses risks for the project. And one has to be mindful of that, because you might have a very good idea. You might have a very nice project, and you are asking for permission for that, but some stakeholders come and say, no, we don't want this, for such and such and such reasons. And that has happened on a number of occasions. And it's this, you know, sort of increasing focus on public participation, which now means that from the project perspective, one has to focus more on the stakeholders, and one has to try and examine and anticipate how they are going to use their participatory rights for or against the project. This empowerment movement. From a project perspective, community and citizen empowerment means that there is added pressure of satisfying the project stakeholders. If you satisfy the project stakeholders, well, then they are not going to use their powers to affect your project. But if you don't, if you ignore them, disregard them, disrespect them, there is a high chance that they might say, well, you know, we also have a say in the matter, as per rule, as per regulation, as per law, and we decide that we are not going to support your project. So not good for you if you are planning or owning or implementing such a project. There is one website which I would advise you to have a look at. This is the International Association for Public Participation. It contains a wealth of information on participation trends throughout the world, different countries, how laws have changed, how rules have changed. And you can see there's a lot of information over here, events, research, e-commerce, and so forth. Different forums they have given over here. The International Association for Public Participation is the preeminent international organization advancing the practice of public participation. So they're into advocacy. They're advocating public participation. Public participation means to involve those who are affected by a decision in the decision-making process. It promotes sustainable decisions by providing participants with the information they need to be involved in a meaningful way, and it communicates to participants how their input affects the decision, and so forth and so forth. So you can find out a lot of information over here just by going through these various links over here: Journal of Public Deliberation, guides, reports, latest research, practice reports, certification, and so forth, code of ethics. You see, we come back to ethics again. Emotion, outrage, and public participation. Outrage is actually a software which also is stakeholder related. So if you want, you can look at all this information which is given over here, and you can find out some interesting things regarding public participation. So this changes in the law over time, increase in public participation and increase in empowerment over time. They have a significant impact on projects because they give stakeholders a certain advantage vis-a-vis projects. And that means you have to look at your stakeholders very carefully, and you have to try and see how they are going to use the law and how they are going to use their empowerment, how they are going to use their public participation to affect your project. They may not. One has to look at all that. In any case, this is an important driver of interest in stakeholder management and engagement. Let us now move on to another driver. This is NGOs, non-governmental organizations. We all heard of non-governmental organizations. We hear about them every day. We read about them every day. Maybe we are passing their offices every day when we are out. Who knows? You might be talking to people every day from NGOs. You might be working in one. NGOs have emerged over time as a major influencing force on many categories of projects which are being undertaken across our globe, especially construction, civil engineering projects. Not only those, of course, also social development programs and projects. NGOs tend to be issue-driven in their approach. And from the project perspective, their impact is usually seen as negative. Many big projects have been severely affected by NGO action. And NGOs also include environmentalist NGOs as a subset of the total NGO movement. Organizations like Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth. And they can have a lot of options at their disposal to affect projects. You see one option here in this image, people demonstrating against something, which could be a project. NGOs, they have a big role. They mobilize people, they provide resources, they coordinate activities. Major contemporary issues for NGOs include protection of the natural environment. Many of the NGOs have been specifically set up to protect natural environment, environmental NGOs. Defense of human rights and the rights of indigenous communities. You have organizations like Survival International, you hear about them. Human rights, you hear of Amnesty International, you hear of Human Rights Watch all the time. Archaeological cultural conservation, you also have many NGOs which have been set up to help preserve archaeological cultural assets. There are some NGOs. NGOs come in all shapes and forms and sizes. Some NGOs have international scope. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth. Others, which are the majority of NGOs actually, because there's such a vast number of them, they tend to be localized. You find them in your local community. You might find them in your local village or your local town. Their scope of activity is only restricted thereto. Or you might find them acting in a certain region or a province. Or you might find them acting only at the national level. You know, some support, agricultural support, or farmers, NGOs, which is catering maybe to the whole nation, or maybe just to a certain province. So you have all types of NGOs. Some are very big. They can have hundreds of employees. Some are very small. They may just have 3, 4, 5 employees. Some have got huge offices, buildings. Others have got, you know, maybe a room in some market somewhere. So it's a huge galaxy there of different NGOs. One thing is, they usually tend to be very dedicated. They usually tend to be very focused. As I had also pointed out in one of the previous lectures, they make networks. They make coalitions, coalition networks, in order to challenge certain types of projects. They're building extension to Heathrow Airport. A large number of NGOs had networked in order to oppose that project. In Latin America, certain mining projects, dam projects, large number of NGOs from within the countries, within the region, and internationally had banded together, had formed a coalition network to oppose such projects. So, and they're very flexible, and they can also use IT nowadays. They can easily communicate. They don't have to meet. They can easily communicate via internet, via email, via video conferencing, in order to share information, to coordinate their opposition to projects. So because of the growth in the non-governmental organization movement, that means that there has been there should be more interest or more focus on NGOs as stakeholders and how they can have an impact on projects and programs. Some examples of NGOs I have given over here: Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, Survival. This is an NGO which is looking after the interests of tribal indigenous people. International Rivers, Oil Sands Truth, shut down the tar sands. So this is an NGO which is against the oil sands, especially in Canada. Rainforest Action Network, Earth Rights International, Human Rights Watch, Center on Housing Rights and Evictions, Earth First, Amazon Watch, Environmental Defender Law Center, Earthworks, Pastoral Commission, Peace and Ecology. You can see here Cultural Survival, Sierra Club, very old American environmental NGO, founded already in 1892. Forest Ethics, Communities for a Better Environment, Forest People's Program, Protest Barrick, that is specifically against a corporation. Mines Communities, Center for International Environment Law. Here again, Natural Resources Defense Council, International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs, and Earth Justice, because the earth needs a good lawyer. So you can see here very large numbers of NGOs, and if you sort of click on them, you know, you can see what kind of information comes up. I have embedded hyperlinks in each of these logos over here. Cookies on Greenpeace. Yes, I accept cookies. Well, I'm not very keen on accepting cookies, but yeah, checks your activities. Well, I have to accept their cookies this time. Anyway, you can see here Greenpeace International and what they are all doing. Latest updates, publications again, videos, photos, news. You can see here all kinds of news headlines specifically relating to the environment. And so forth. 8 reasons why Shell can't be trusted in the Arctic. Greenpeace and Shell, you know, this sort of like fire and water when you mix the two of them. Always something or the other. And you can see here a large number of people have sort of say they like Greenpeace, 1,252,000. Things you can do. This is the sort of advocacy function, and also the activities which these NGOs tend to do. Tell President Obama to suspend Shell's Arctic drilling permits. You know, here they're actually providing a forum for people, you know, to get together, sign online petitions, and so forth. Sign this manifesto. Demand Mexico to prohibit genetically engineered corn. tell KFC to stop turning rainforests into rubbish, stand with the people of Brazil to save the Amazon, and so forth. This is all environmental related activities. A lot is going on over there. This is just a tiny drop in a glass full of water. Specific NGOs which I've just picked out because they sort of seemed very interesting. There's some more NGOs over here. Transparency International, you know, which rallies against corruption. They have got lots to say about Pakistan, which isn't surprising. And other NGOs which you have got over here are about oil, Stakeholder Democracy Network, Bank Information Center, Earth Rights, Nature Conservancy, Environmental Law Institute, Environmental Defense Fund, Monuments and Sites. I talked about archaeological and cultural heritage. Well, this is one NGO which looks after archaeological, cultural heritage. So now we have to move on. Another driver of interest in project stakeholder management and engagement, that is of course information communication technology, which as we know has grown at a phenomenal rate in sophistication in the last 25 years or so, since the late 1980s, early 1990s. Advances in information communication technology over the past 25 years have revolutionized the way we live and work. Projects are no exception. You know, if you think about 25 years ago, there's no laptops, there was no iPads, no cell phones, no iPhones, you know, all these things which, you know, we take for granted now, and which you see everyone running around with, everyone running around with a laptop, everyone running around with a cell phone. Well, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we didn't have all that. So this technology has really changed the way in which we live, we work, we communicate, we interact with each other. And information communication technology is really a two-edged sword. It has brought project stakeholders numerous and enormous benefits, but it has also brought them risks and dangers, which from a project perspective can sometimes be very dangerous. And what are the benefits for project stakeholders? Well, if you look at the primary stakeholders, or the internal project stakeholders, you know, who are actively involved in planning, conceiving, designing, implementing a project, you will see that technology has got a lot of application areas. For instance, in project management. Now we don't have to do everything manually. We can use technology. We can, for instance, use project management software programs like MS Project, Primavera, or the many other project softwares, management softwares which are there, specialized project management softwares, or more broader applicable area project management softwares. Project informatization, project analysis. Now it's very easy to store information. I mean, many years ago you would have all these documents, and you would have to collect all these documents, and you would have to store them somewhere, maybe in a physical facility like this room. Now you can store information on hard drives, you can store them on CDs or DVDs, you can store them on portable devices and flash drives, and so forth. All this which is now possible was not possible a long time ago, and this has resulted in information being more mobile. It's much more easy to transfer information than it used to be. It's much more easy to carry around information than it used to be. It's also much more easier to analyze information than it used to be. Now, for instance, if you have a large project document and you are looking for a certain term which you used in that document, all you have to do is go in the search function and the computer will find that term for you. Before, you might have had to go through the whole document, you know, page by page to find that term, which would be a very time-consuming activity. Project design, modeling, visualization, simulation. A lot of softwares are on the market now, you know, for designing, AutoCAD, 3D Studio Max, etc., for modeling, visualizing. If you want to visualize how a factory is going to look like, or if you want to visualize how a power station is going to look like, or how a bridge is going to look like, the software can do it for you now. and you can look at that, and then you can change the design parameters, and then you can see how your finished product will look like. All this is possible through the use of IT. Project communication, communicating via email, communicating, for instance, via Skype, via video conferencing, and project collaboration software, which stakeholders can use at different locations and work together, updating documents, designing, drawing, and so forth in real time. Monitoring, evaluation, control, large numbers of tools are there. Input procurement, supply chain management, JIT systems, which I had talked about, which is all electronic based. And project publicity. If you are doing a project and you are an internal stakeholder, you can publicize your project. You can use, for instance, a website. You can have a project website which is accessible to the general public, and the general public can see, oh, this project, this is what we are doing, here are some diagrams, this is how it's going to look like, this is the benefits it's going to bring, etc., etc., etc. All this is now possible with the application of information communication technology, things which would have been impossible maybe 30 years ago or so. So you can see information communication technology has brought huge benefits for stakeholders, in this case for the internal project stakeholders. Of course, there's also issues for the internal project stakeholders, yes. You can carry information around very easily, but what about the security of that information? You might have heard of cases where, like when war was going on, Iraq war, some people, they had got flash drives full of confidential information, and they had left them or they had lost them, and then they became public. Now information became public, which otherwise should have been confidential. There's this question of information security. How do you ensure the security of information, that it does not fall into the hands of people who should not be getting it? Information overload. Yes, you have now lots and lots of information. You can store that information. You can even process that information, but when does it become an overload? When you have simply too much information and you are trying to find the relevant information and you're finding it difficult. Even IT cannot always help you over here. They cannot always, they cannot read your mind. Technology cannot read your mind and say, oh, we know what you want, this is it. They'll present you with that information, but you could be overloaded by it. Technology is no substitute for quality. You can have information, but is it quality information? And in one of the subsequent classes, we'll look at the concept of quality information. There are many different parameters to it. Technology cannot always help you in getting quality information. Over-reliance on ICT has become a big problem by stakeholders now. You become too reliant on ICT. You're sitting the whole day at your desk, you're working at your computer, at your laptop, or using your cell phone. It breaks down. What happens? Everything stops. Work stops, activities stop. Too much reliance on ICT. And adverse publicity about a project. You can use IT to publicize your project, but others can also use IT to oppose your project. It's a two-edged sword, basically. Just as a company which is doing a mining project can put up a website and say, we have this great mining project, it's going to bring jobs to so many people, it's going to bring economic benefits to so and so many people, it's going to bring this, it's going to bring that. You can do that, but those who are opposing a project, those stakeholders who are opposing a project, they can put up their own website and they can say, terrible project, this mining project, how much damage it's going to do, how much pollution it's going to do, and so forth, and so forth. Well, I think I have made the point. We have looked at all the different drivers of interest in project stakeholder management and engagement. And I have identified 9 drivers, and we have gone through each of these drivers, and you can see that all of them, they have got some substantive merit in order to back them on. What I'm going to do now in the next lecture is I'm going to move on to the 4th part of our course. And here we will start looking more at the details of project stakeholder management and engagement. What we are going to do is we will be looking at the strategies, processes and tools specifically in project stakeholder management and engagement. And there is a lot which we have to cover, a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts. And so I think all of you may be looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to that. What we have done in these 12 lectures is we have essentially laid the groundwork for you to get a deeper insight now into project stakeholder management and engagement. And I hope that after having sit through these 12 lectures, that you already have a very good idea of what project stakeholder management and engagement is all about. And you can see that it is something which it might be new for you. You might not have heard about it before, but it's very relevant from a project management perspective. And for the future project managers among you who want to work on big projects in whatever field, whether it's social development, whether it's IT, whether it's construction, no matter in which project area you are working, you will find out that stakeholder management and engagement is perhaps the most challenging field. I doubt if you will find the technical issues so complex. They can also be complex, but most complex of all is really dealing with stakeholders. It's managing relationships, managing trust, managing expectations, managing perceptions. These are the key parameters which are really defining stakeholder management and engagement. And if you can manage and engage your stakeholders nicely, if you can get them on your side, then you will see that not only will your life be much easier, but your projects also will stand much greater chance of success, which of course will be very good for you, it'll be very good for your organizations, it'll be very good for your careers and for everyone working with and around you. Okay, so thank you very much, and I say see you in the next class.